What does big game hunting entail for the Utah Jazz? Who could the Jazz go after and how? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. I'm excited to be back with you guys, filling in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who you guys know by now, a credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the 2023 NBA Combine, soon to be attendee of the 2024 NBA Combine, where I'll be giving you Locked On Jazz episodes live from Chicago at the Combine, at the Lottery, and I can't wait to do that. I'm also a statistician and broadcast assistant for the past 3 seasons of the Utah Jazz, lifelong Jazz fan, and a lover of college hoops, so I'm very qualified to give you exceptional insight on what prospects the Jazz could take at a critical juncture in Jazz history, because the Jazz need a star, and how might they get one? Is it this upcoming draft? Is it through trades? That's what we're going to analyze today. Thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz the opening thing of your day, the first listen of your day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question is, what player do you want the Jazz to trade for, if any? And I'm going to give you a few options, but the question's simple. Just what player, if any, do you want to be on the Utah Jazz next year via trade? Now, today's title sponsor of the show, and thank you to them for sponsoring it, is Monopoly Go, and you guys got to download it and play against your friends. I've been doing it, and I've been playing against Richard Stamen, Mavs draft, who I do Locked On NBA Big Board with, and we've been battling and taunting one another back and forth on who wins. So make sure you get Monopoly Go on your App Store or Google Play and start battling your friends. All right, what's on the agenda today? In the first segment, I'll outline the top commodity that big game hunting could entail, and that's how the Jazz could land Giannis. In the second segment, I'll break down a slightly more available, little bit less of a big name, and how the Jazz could reel in Devin Booker. And then in the final segment, I'll pitch, is Brandon Ingram a big enough commodity to link to our future to him? Find out next on Locked On Jazz. Let's dive right in. All righty. Giannis is a super duper star who may be descending ever so slightly, but all the same, he would have a very, very real chance of being maybe the all-time greatest player in Utah Jazz history. Giannis is an 8-time All-Star, 7-time All-NBA, 5-time All-Defense, 2-time MVP, 1-time Defensive Player of the Year, 1-time Finals winner, 1-time Finals MVP, and he also won a Most Improved Player. So an incredibly accomplished player. And just this past season, he scored 30.4 points per game, 11.5 rebounds per game, 6.5 assists per game, and shot 61% from the field. That's a top 5 player in the NBA, and that might be lowballing it. That alone is the reason I start with Giannis, because he is the best player in the NBA, that there's even a sliver of a chance he's available to be moved. Just a sliver, but he's the best player with that sliver of a chance. The other reason is Danny Ainge happened to say big game hunting, and deer is considered big game, but returning from wordplay semantics and puns, which I'm a big fan of, to the matter at hand, why would Milwaukee let this happen? Here's why. Giannis is becoming injury prone. And this is not a huge slight on him. He played a lot of games this year. He just missed the playoffs. Last year, he missed the playoffs as well. And due to his game being heavily reliant on superior athleticism at his size, if injuries and age continue to ramp up, injuries ramping up, age creeping in, the Bucks will not be true contenders, and they're already trending toward not being true contenders, and they were a little bit dysfunctional this year. Giannis has not played 75 games since 2017, 2018, and this year it was close, but he missed the entire postseason, which is what you want to play. There's an old saying, there's 82-game players and there's 16-game players. Well, Giannis has had instances where he's the best in the world in the playoffs, like he scored 50 in a Game 6. He closed out the Suns and won a championship, but there have also been times where he's been a little bit underwhelming in those environments, and there's also been some times the Bucks have lost earlier than anticipated. This year they were injury prone, but that's not entirely on him. Like, that's not entirely his fault, and obviously him being injured hurt. But the Bucks are now an aging team, not Giannis, but everyone on the Bucks. That they've mostly aged out of their primes. There's coaching drama, and there's players on the back nine of their careers. So making trades could be appealing to some degree for the franchise. Just that is what it is. Dame had a bad season compared to his illustrious standards and found himself injured in the playoffs and a limited version of himself. He's also aging. He was drafted in 2012, and now that puts him into his 13th season. And he's been excellent throughout his career, but a small guard that's aging, loses a little bit of quickness, and he had a serious calf injury in the playoffs. Brook Lopez was drafted 15 years ago and is still good, but he's not quite what he was even just a year or two ago in a different system. Chris Middleton's only played in 88 games the past 2 years combined and seems to be regressing both offensively and defensively. And then you have a couple of issues that revolve around their franchise. Doc Rivers came in at 30-13 was the record when Adrian Griffin was let go, because a lot of rumors said that Giannis wasn't happy with the way Griffin was coaching the relationship with his brother Thanasis. And Doc Rivers, for winning a championship, is much maligned for being an overrated coach. He's had a lot of talent and has not won too much. He's gotten a lot of opportunities due to winning in 2008 with KG, Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, Rajon Rondo. I mean, Danny Ainge constructed that team. Maybe Danny Ainge deserves more credit than Doc Rivers in that case. So there's writing on the wall for the Bucks, and they're true contention. Is it real contention from this point forward? I don't know. They swung and missed on trading Drew Holiday to get Dame, and then Drew went to their main rivals in the East, the Boston Celtics, who look like the likely Eastern Conference champions, if not the world champions. So now that's the Bucks. Now let's go to the Jazz. As for the Jazz, Giannis would bring a star to town, but debilitate the Jazz as we know it. Let's make something clear. The Jazz would have no chance to keep Lauri in this instance if they got Giannis. So now it's Giannis and youngsters, and the question becomes, what is the timeline and how many picks do you give, along with how many players currently would you give with Giannis? And then the last question, I think the most important of the ones, how many good, true Giannis seasons do you get? How many seasons of 30 of what I just read off to you guys, of 30.4, 11.5, 6.5, and 61% from the field do you get from Giannis? And then how long does it take for the rest of the team to come up to speed and play with Giannis? Because if you're just getting Giannis and you don't have the other guys, the other horses to make the team better, it makes me a little scared to make that trade. My guess would be the Jazz would have to send Lauri, maybe Clarkson, likely Keontae, plus a few desirable picks for Giannis. And that would surely be big game hunting. But as I prepare this episode, I started to think that I had less faith in what the turnout would be for the Jazz. Not because Giannis isn't great, because I think he's the top 3 player in the NBA currently. But it's because the new CBA is very hard to win with, and with a great player, if unable to support him, with whether shrewd contracts are built around him to support with really good players that are considered underpaid by some, but appropriately played for those who are winning. But also, you need a really well-built franchise. And while I'd be thrilled to see Giannis suit up for the Jazz, I think the Jazz trading for a star, but torpedoing their assets to acquire a superstar, skip steps. And the Jazz have to go step by step to raise back to the level of competing for titles. I mean, I think that Giannis has the ability to put the Jazz in contention to make the playoffs, but we saw a team like the Phoenix Suns really struggle to truly contend against a team that was more well built with an up and coming star that's arrived in Anthony Edwards, with Rudy Gobert, with Mike Conley, with Karl Anthony Towns. And I know those are really good players, but that's one that you would say if you were building off star power, the Suns were the better team, but the rest of their team wasn't built right. So if the Jazz had Giannis, you have a top 3 player in the league. But if the team lost Lauri Markkanen, it lost Jordan Clarkson, it lost Keontae George, and the assets for the future, how good is that team really when you have other teams to contend with, of the like of Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets, the up-and-coming Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards at 22 years old, taking them past the Nuggets in Game 1 in Denver of the Western Conference second round. You have the Thunder, who are the 1 seed, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren. How much of that time frame are you willing to sacrifice for a couple of good years of Giannis if your team isn't well built to support him? So it makes me a little tentative. Coming up next, I'll discuss a Class B superstar, or maybe a Class B star, as opposed to Giannis, who's a Class A super duper star, who could maybe keep more pieces on the Utah Jazz and enable the Jazz to compete for titles. But first, let me tell you about Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. Yes, I did. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you can work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with a friend to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it right now for free on Google Play or on the App Store. Game on. It's also winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back into Locked On Jazz, and real quick, let me ask you guys a question. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on the TV all day long because you want to watch the playoffs, but then it's left on, and then you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All righty, we're back. Leif Thulin here on Locked On Jazz, and we're talking about what actually comprises big game hunting. We talked about the big kahuna, the biggest buck of them all, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. And does it work for the Jazz? I kind of, as I started making that argument for it, I almost decided against it for the Jazz. I think it takes away too much of what the Jazz have, and unless you're able to shrewdly build around Giannis, you're seeing the Bucks fall apart doing so with a ton of really good players, and the West is better than the East. So it makes me a little hesitant. And maybe you're skipping steps trying to get a superstar rather than trying to organically build your team. So Giannis is a top 3 player in the world, in my opinion, but it would crater the Jazz's roster if they could lure him from Milwaukee, where I assume he stays for life. But it would still be worth a shot. But could the Jazz get Devin Booker? What would it take, and why would the Suns consider this? Let's explore. All right, let's talk from the top. Who is Devin Booker? We all know him. He's a top 15 player in the NBA, in my opinion, who I think is right on the cusp of having the ability to be the #1 guy on a well-constructed team that can win. Can maybe win a title, at least as a Western Conference contender. And he's shown that at different times. Booker this season scored 27, 5 rebounds, 7 assists on 49% from the field, 36 from 3, and 89% from the line shooting splits. That could get him a 3rd team at All-NBA this season, I think. And some years would get you 2nd. I just think that it's a pretty busy guard line this year, particularly in the Western Conference. I mean, honestly, the Western Conference is going to have a lot of representatives in that backcourt for years to come with Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Devin Booker, and among others. There's other players, obviously Steph Curry, and the reason I include him in this one is he's a little older than these guys. Still excellent, though. All right, adding to what Booker does, in the playoff games defended by the best in the world defensively, Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and the Timberwolves defense that's rated as highly as they are, he scored 49 points in an elimination game. You could argue that some of those defenders got the better of him in the first 2 games, but 49 in an elimination game, he's got the makings of a real player that can carry you to heights, unbeknownst by some. His team was terribly constructed. I alluded to that in the first segment. And for those who love the Nurkic deal, I think that was ludicrous. He plays very little defense. They lacked a point guard, and somehow they made the most potent offensive weapon in the NBA, Kevin Durant, look more like a rook on a chessboard than a queen on a chessboard. Meaning Kevin Durant was relegated to becoming a secondary option offensively for the Phoenix Suns, and they limited their upside on the offensive side of the floor, and defensively they weren't well built to contend. So they're a dumpster fire in Phoenix now because in some ways they're a dumpster fire. In other ways, you would say, as their owner Matt Ishbia did, that the 26 of the 29 other general managers would trade their team and say, well, we want that team instead of ours. That might be true because they have such superstars, but you're seeing that's not what wins right now, because you need to have an ability to play all 48 minutes well. And when the Jazz were playing their best this past year, it was when they were playing 10 players deep and having their 10 be better than the opposing team's 6 or 7. Well, the Suns had 3 excellent players, one of whom, Bradley Beal, was often injured and never quite got a rhythm. Kevin Durant wasn't at his best. Devin Booker was really good throughout the year. And then Grayson Allen had a great shooting year, but didn't shoot well in the playoffs. But the rest of their team just wasn't well comprised. So in some ways, they're a dumpster fire. Durant and Beal, I think, are gone because they're aging stars. Durant obviously would be an unbelievably hot commodity. I think the big markets, Miami, namely, maybe he returns to OKC and just for some storybook type of stuff right there. Beal, less hot commodity, but still an offensive weapon and would be desirable to some. I believe they're gone, meaning they could start a rebuild in Phoenix. And that's where I think the Jazz become interesting. Would Booker go through another rebuilding process as he did when he was first drafted to the Suns? I don't know. Booker was picked 13th, one pick behind the Jazz, who took Trey Lyles. Would Booker, in the prime of his career, risk another rebuilding process? Would he be patient enough to see what the Suns can do for him, as they've been a kind of aggressive franchise in years past? Or would he, along with the Suns, contemplate kind of building from scratch and they explore making some trades? So that's where it becomes worth asking the question for the Utah Jazz. So what would the Jazz have to give up for Booker? My assumption would be that the Suns immediately center trade talks around saying they need Lauri Markkanen in return. And it becomes a similar proposition to that of dealing for Giannis, of cratering the roster in order to get a star. But Booker is younger, meaning there's more time to develop a team around him than there is for Giannis. But he would not want to play here if he's rebuilding, just like he wouldn't want to play for Phoenix. Now, that's where it gets interesting. A lot of people on Jazz Twitter have been cooking up trades for Devin Booker, saying this is feasible. Well, I looked through a few of them, and I found one that was mocked up by Sports Illustrated that I think is interesting, and there's pros and cons to it if you're a Jazz fan. Obviously, if you can get Booker for the least assets possible, if you're a Jazz fan, you take it. Like, that's what we want to see, but it has to be feasible. So I found one that I think is feasible, and I'll explain the pros and cons. So this is from Sports Illustrated, and I'll break down the deal and if I do it. So what it says is Utah acquires Devin Booker. Pretty cut and dry. Phoenix acquires John Collins, Colin Sexton, the 2025 first-round pick via Cleveland, the 2026 first-round pick via Minnesota or Cleveland, the 2027 first-round pick via Los Angeles Lakers, the 2028 first-round pick via the Jazz, their own pick, and the 2029 first-round pick from Minnesota. So that's 5 picks, John Collins and Colin Sexton. But the Jazz would keep Lauri Markkanen. Collins and Sexton have money on their deals to cover most of the money that you would get for Booker, and so the monetary side checks out. So it becomes about picks, because if you're getting Booker for Collins and Sexton, that's great. So it's about the picks and how much you value them and how much you believe Devin Booker can lead you to the promised land. So the 2025 first from Cleveland is an interesting one, with Donovan Mitchell potentially leaving Cleveland and making the team that's a 4 seed just advanced past the Magic. Probably will lose to the Celtics. Worse than they were this year. They might not be terrible because they still have talent, but they're going to be worse than what they were. And if they crater and they rebuild, that's a desirable pick in a desirable draft class in 2025. But to me, that's not going to make or break this trade. Minnesota or Cleveland's 2026 doesn't make or break a deal either, even though it becomes interesting if Cavaliers decide to pivot and look into the draft to find their star, if they don't think Mobley or Garland is the guy, assuming Donovan isn't in wine and gold. That's the color scheme for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that doesn't make or break the deal either for me. But this is where it gets interesting. The Jazz would have to keep their own pick. And I don't know if they would if they had Devin Booker, because that means they'd have to be in the top 8 picks, because this year, should the Jazz keep their pick in the top 10, which there's only a 0.6 percent chance that the Jazz don't have their top 10 pick. That means that next year they have a top 8 protected pick. So then they would have no picks unless they're bad again with Devin Booker, which seems unlikely. And that's a really desirable draft class. So that's where it becomes a little tricky. Then you get to the 2027 pick. The Los Angeles Lakers pick gives me some pause, because the franchise will likely be so different by then, with likely no LeBron, likely no Anthony Davis, but it is Los Angeles. They could lure a star somehow. But it becomes a little more sketchy to make this deal for the Jazz, more so with this pick than either the 2025 or the 2026, even if the Jazz were to use their own pick in the 2025, which I know isn't the rumored trade. But that's just something to think about, because LeBron and AD leaving means the Lakers could be in the market for a star in 2027. The Jazz have a top 4 protected pick. So if the Lakers are within the top 4, the Jazz wouldn't get it. But that's a pick that would be extremely desirable. In sum, the Suns would receive a lot of desirable assets. That's 5 first-round picks. Colin Sexton, fresh off 20 points per game. John Collins, though he's critiqued for having a lot of numbers that don't mean a ton by many fans in terms of the amount of winning over his career with the Hawks and the Jazz, he's still a productive player. And then there's 5 picks along with it. So the Suns would receive a lot of desirable future and current assets, and the Jazz would get a Class B star. And what I mean by that is he's a guy who I think is 10 through 15 perennially. I don't think he ever cracks the top 10. And how many of those type of guys have won? But he has the chance. He does have the chance to alter a franchise. That's what I say. You're always trying to draft. You're always trying to draft the ability to alter a franchise with that type of star. And if the Jazz keep marketing in the trade, along with George and Hendricks, I would take the chance and see what the Jazz can do in the remaining 7 or so years of Devin Booker's career and his prime as the youthful core develops and starts putting pressure. It does put pressure on the Jazz to hit on their picks and win on their rookie deal. But I think you got to take that chance of having a star that even if you have back-to-back number one picks, there's a real chance Devin Booker is better than the number one pick of the 2024 draft. Probably that's very likely, in fact. And then the 2025, if it's Cooper Flag, I think there's a pretty good chance Devin Booker's still a better player when it's all said and done because we already know what he is. He's a known commodity than tanking does and getting you back-to-back number one picks, which is extremely unlikely, first of all. But even if that were to happen, there's a real chance Booker's better than both of them. So that's why I would say, even though this is a trade that would give me some pause because future assets mean a lot in the world of basketball, and just a few things could tweak the career and then your team for a while. Say there's an injury, say there's something, but he gets disgruntled and there's a retirement, and you mortgage a lot of your franchise away for one player. That stuff happens in basketball, so it gives me some pause. But I think there's a chance that I would probably pull the trigger on this one for the Jazz because a young star that doesn't take away Lauri and that level player of Devin Booker's quality is hard to get, and you get to keep your future, try to hit on some draft picks. That elevates you into playoff contenders at a certain pace, and you have to do that sooner rather than later. Fans get a little frustrated. So maybe I'm a little trigger happy, but I'm pretty excited to have that chance. So I would say I would make the trade. That trade is a pretty even one in my opinion. And if the Devin Booker could come to the Utah Jazz, I would accept it for that deal, and obviously for anything less. But let me know what you guys think. Let me agree if you agree with that take. And lastly, let's see if this upcoming trade moves the needle for Jazz fans. But first, let me tell you about DoorDash. Want to make mom smile? Start Mother's Day with flowers or surprise her with gifts from brands she loves delivered by the very same day with DoorDash. DoorDash is more than just the great food delivery you've come to love. For instance, does mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur, or is she outdoorsy? No matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or a flower bouquet. Makeup, tech gear, workout gear, and much, much more. Whatever you want, DoorDash has it. Shop with savings that can make her proud with a Dash Pass membership. You'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass. Merchants that can meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees, including the service fee, do apply. Terms apply. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order, now with code LOCKEDONNBA. That's Locked On NBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Also, let me tell you about Murdoch Chevy. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. You know the family, you love them. Chevy is truly American. When you think of a truck in the old movies, it's a Chevy. It's the absolute most stereotypical American car, and the reason they are is because it's successful everywhere it's been. The ones in Utah are located in Woods Cross and Logan. The great lineup of Chevy trucks, the Chevrolet Colorado, the Silverado are some of the featured trucks. You go to the website to see the latest deals and see what's in stock. They always update it on their websites, and you can see what the newest features are and all the different trucks on the websites as well as in person. The amazing lineup of SUVs are also there with the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazer, the Equinox, and the Trax, and they're all sensational, all up to date on the website. See which ones are in stock. Come visit them at the various stores, once again, located in Woods Cross and in Logan, and make sure to tell them we sent you in from Locked On Jazz, and they love to hear that. All righty, welcome back into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and we have gone through two superstars who are Jazz. They're on Jazz wish lists all over the place. But let's outline a world I don't think is impossible in which the Jazz try to pair Lauri Markkanen with Brandon Ingram. Ingram is not a Giannis or a Booker, but he is definitely a better player than you saw defended in a terrible series caused by the defensive havoc and torture, honestly, of Lou Dort. He was unbelievable, hounding Brandon Ingram. Dort is a monster, but Ingram isn't meant to be a top-tier, tier one player. And I hear you and myself say, well, is Lauri either? I don't know. So then what good is this? We still have two kind of not number ones, and does that move the needle? That's a fair point. Well, Ingram is highly effective, and with Zion out many times over the past few years, Ingram has still performed very well despite the recent playoff failure. 21 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 49 from the field, 36 from 3, and 80 from the line. Those were his stats this year. That's a really good player. Without Zion over his career, he averages 24 points per game, 24.2 to be exact, on effectively the same shooting numbers. He's about 47.5, 35, and 82 from the line. So his points go slightly up. His efficiency dwindles just a touch without Zion. But the main allure of this is the deal would not include Lauri. That's a huge plus. It continues to give the Jazz plus size and positions they want it. It would not take the amount of picks the Booker deal would, or the part of Lauri where I still think that the Suns would first ask about Lauri marketing. So this one, the Pelicans wouldn't ask about that. Per ESPN Trade Machine, the Jazz monetarily would be successful in trying to trade if this package was what the Jazz did. Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson for Ingram. I know that's probably not what it is. I'm just saying monetarily, that's all you really need. Two players that are good players, but not of the ilk of Brandon Ingram. And now I think the Jazz would need to add picks. Maybe not give the two like highly coveted top first round guards. I mean, you would have to give some picks, but they wouldn't have to be as alluring as the picks would be for Devin Booker, because Devin Booker is a similar age. He's a little bit older than Brandon Ingram, but he's established himself as a true star. Ingram's on the periphery of stardom. Now, maybe the trade wouldn't be Clarkson and Sexton because they're both score first guards, and the Pels, they need a guard probably because CJ McCollum's aging, but I don't know if that's exactly the allure. But the point is, you can build a trade, whether it's a 3-team deal where the other team pitches in a different player that's more desirable to the Pelicans and it works out. But monetarily, the Jazz would be successful dealing Clarkson and Collins. And if you were to do, Clarkson and Sexton, if you were to do Clarkson and Collins, according to my notes from Trade Machine, the money for that straight up Clarkson and Collins didn't quite work because Collins is just a touch more expensive than Sexton. But you could also add another player in from the Pelicans or vice versa and make it work. So essentially the deals cancel each other out monetarily. But the level of players is close in terms of Clarkson and Sexton. And the money aligns. And that means the Pelicans could add the players they want to the trade. And that means you've got a foundation. As for the Jazz would get a true scorer who's extremely underrated as a passer. And the Jazz would have two similarly staged in their careers scorers to co-lead them to the promised land, hopefully. The youngsters could stay and develop, though if I'm the Pelicans and I see that deal, I would definitely ask for Hendricks or George or one of the picks. And the Jazz would likely say, okay, we'll give you one of the picks, maybe not the Lakers one in 2027. Maybe we'd pitch the Cavaliers one because you have faith that the Cavaliers are going to be decent enough, but there's still the allure for the Pelicans that the Cavaliers, sans Donovan Mitchell, would have a chance to be bad. So you try to play your cards close to your chest and you say, well, do we want to give up Hendricks or George, or do we want to give up a potential pick? And a lot of teams, the pick is more desirable than it ends up being. So that's how sometimes getting traded picks is excellent. Like the Celtics got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown out of a picks, but oftentimes those picks don't end up being as valuable as they sound when you hear it as a first round pick. So I think Brandon Ingram, along with Keontae George, Lauri Markkanen, and Walker Kessler, hopefully Taylor Hendricks, and you only lose maybe a pick or two, Colin Sexton and or John Collins, along with Jordan Clarkson, seems like a favorable deal. And I would strongly weigh the chance to get a one-time All-Star in Brandon Ingram that in terms of recent views feels a little bit like a reclamation project. You're buying low. And whether that's fair or not, it seems like what it is at this point. And the Pelicans are looking to kind of position themselves for the future. And it's around Zion Williamson. It's with Trey Murphy. It's CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, those type of players. And it feels like Ingram's a little bit outside of where their future is heading. Does Ingram and Lauri get the Jazz plus picks to come over and actually compete along with the ascension of Keontae George and Taylor Hendricks and hopefully Walker Kessler refine some of that rookie form? Does that excite Jazz fans enough to pull a trigger, or does it have to be a true star? Or do you say, you know what, trading sounds great and all, but I want the Jazz to tank? And you guys tell me what makes you, as the Jazz fans, true contenders. What does it take? I think tanking is still an alluring option, but the last two ones I mentioned, even though Giannis is an unbelievably good player, extremely good player. Those last two options sound a little bit more desirable for me because I think sometimes when you get a little greedy, you skip steps, and the Jazz don't have the ability to skip steps and be a free agent destination to pair other players with Giannis. I think they either got to find your star via the draft or try to play a little bit of small ball. Maybe you make a trade that's aggressive and find yourself in the playoffs, gain experience, and hope for the ascension of some of your players on the roster right now. But I'd contend that Booker's as good as high level of a star as you can probably get right now. And some would contend that's not good enough. You want to build through the draft and try to get better. But like I mentioned, there's a real chance Cooper Flagg's not a better player than Devin Booker. So I posit that. I would say Brandon Ingram, Devin Booker are the two players that I would kind of look for, and those are some frameworks for deals. Let me know what you guys think. Is trading for stars a necessary step in the rebuilding into contention for you, the Utah Jazz, or is tanking the way to go? Find your stars through the draft and develop the youngsters and become similar to what the Oklahoma City Thunder are. Are you guys on board? Let me know. Let me know in your guys' comments, and thanks again for making this your first listen. And also let me tell you about Locked On having launched their first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you guys for listening. It's always a pleasure being back with you guys, and I'm excited to host for the next 2 weeks, including when I'm at the NBA Combine. And I've got a lot of good stuff lined up for you, including guests, draft talk, more trade talk, and a little bit of playoff analysis for those of you intrepidly watching the NBA playoffs without our Utah Jazz involved. Hopefully we'll see the Jazz up there soon. Thank you guys for listening to Locked On Jazz, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.